All right. It's so funny. This is the longest class we've taught, and I thought for sure, I was like, we're going to cover so much stuff. We're going to get everything in there. I'm going to be at a loss for material to cover. And here we are the last week, and I'm like, I've got like 5 more weeks of things to cover. So, um, such is life. But I think we're gonna try to cover a couple things that'll be demo-ish, and then a couple things that'll be sort of like, hey, here's some cool stuff to check out that we have notebooks for or that we're working on. So hopefully that'll give people a little bit of inspiration to continue with this work. So it is week 10. This is the last week of class. I hope people got something out of this course, even if it was just like, I never want to do machine learning again. I think that's a very valid thing to learn. Um, but hopefully you also were like, oh, I think there's some cool stuff here. Maybe I don't like this, but do you like this, like that sort of thing. So hopefully you were able to learn something or find something cool that you enjoyed. Um, yeah, so we'll be covering a little bit more stuff. We do have sort of like one more potential meeting, which Leah will talk about in just a minute. We usually do at the end of these classes like a show and tell, which is sort of like an optional thing for people to sort of show some work they made. It's cool. We do like YouTube streaming, so you can invite your friends and family to like come watch you perform on stage. It's also very chill. There's like no requirement for you to like make something that's like no one's ever seen before. It's just sort of like a fun moment to sort of like look back on all the work we did. So Leah can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Um, I was going to say that so Leah is teaching a class that was basically that's probably similar to this one. It's already sold out. I was going to say I'm teaching like an advanced style again class that will sort of cover a lot more of what I'm going to like very quickly breeze through today. But that class sold out like 2 hours ago. So if anyone is really interested in taking that class, you can message me. I can't make any promises because we're already at capacity. But if someone really wants to take that class, I can maybe squeeze in another person or two. So that's called like advanced StyleGAN. We're just going to look at StyleGAN and like a bunch of different tools that people have extended from there. I'm also teaching a class that is about video art. So using FFmpeg, which is this like very Byzantine but cool tool that you might have seen get referenced every now and then when we make videos here. I still have spots open for that, so if anyone's interested, I can link you to some tools for that. That'll be more of like a little bit more of a coding class and not really a machine learning class, but there'll be still some fun art to be made. Yeah, and then obviously, hopefully, we'll be teaching more classes once Leah and I are done with our plethora of things. So you can keep an eye out for additional classes we'll be teaching then. Cool. So with that, I think we should jump into some slides. I guess, Leah, I should share first since I'm going to be covering material first. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. Can everybody see my screen? Cool. Okay. So obviously, as we mentioned, week 10. So we'll just be covering some stuff that we wanted to cover. Um, Last week didn't get to, so we'll cover a little bit more of that, which will be like inference and some other things. And then, whoops, this is the wrong deck. 1 second here. Oh no, what's going on? Of course, already my computer is not happy. Leah, would you mind linking to the deck just so people have it and then I can pull it up real quick? We're just going to close a bunch. Thank you. I'm going to close some windows here and hope that helps. All right. Leah, want to talk a little bit about show and tell? Oh, Leah. Yeah. Okay, good. We can't hear you.
Oh, hello.
There we go. Yep.
Now?
Yep.
Okay. Um, cool. Yeah, so the show and tell, like Derek said, usually we like to do it. It's like a YouTube live stream, totally no pressure. You don't even have to do it. You could just tune in. Um, but if you do want to share your work, general rules of thumb are 5 to 7 minutes per person. You can present live, you can make a pre-recorded video. It can be like a demo of you showing stuff on your desktop, or you could make slides. It's totally up to you, totally open. And yeah, like zero pressure to have a polished project at all. Like, yeah, just it's already like a huge accomplishment to have like gone through this process. And like even if you're like, I tried this and it didn't work and it came out looking weird, that's also very important for people to know and learn. And it's always a lot of fun seeing like things that everybody tried and seeing what came out. And yeah, just hearing about people's experience and their projects. So yeah, I guess like the call to action is fill out this poll so we can schedule the show and tell. It'll be in a couple weeks, so y'all will have time um, to yeah run through these Colab notebooks and think about your project.
Cool. Yeah. And also, we will continue doing co-working sessions. So if you have an idea for a project you want to do for show and tell, like, feel free to stop by for those sessions and we can walk you through or like help with making that happen. And I think Leah linked to a previous show and tell. So if you just want to see how other people presented, it is very low key. Moises has helped us out with AV before. Um, but yeah, it's just a nice way to just sort of be like, okay, I learned a bunch of stuff. Can I make something that I can just share? It's a nice way to sort of like force yourself to just finish out the class. So definitely recommend it if you're interested. I know everyone has busy schedules, so there's no requirement here, but it's a fun time, and it also is like a nice way to start to show your work. Because if you are interested in doing more of this, or like, um, you know, I don't want to say become a professional machine learning artist, but if you just are interested in sharing work, it's like a nice. I invite a lot of people who I know through the machine learning art world, and I know Leah does too, and it's a nice way to get your work seen by other people. Cool. So we have a little bit to talk about today. We'll do two demos, and then we'll like do a really quick pass through a bunch of other things that you might be interested in. And again, if you see something you're really interested in and you want to try it for like the show and tell project, let Leah or I know, and we can happily like walk you through some of those tools a little bit more. All right, so let's get started. So um, there's sort of this one of the cool things about StyleGAN is that there are so many people working on various parts of StyleGAN. Big research labs, lots of hobbyists, that sort of thing. But there's a lot you can do with StyleGAN because of how the model itself works and that it's like mostly mathematics. People have sort of found lots of different ways to manipulate those mathematic pieces to do different things. So the good news is that there's a lot more you can do. One of the maybe this is on me, but like one of the parts right now is like there's a lot of older tools, and by old I mean a year old, um, that don't yet work for the newest models, which we are already training in. So we're already using this PyTorch model. I am as quickly or as not quickly as possible going back and retrofitting all of those pieces to work with our new models. So not everything is available at the moment, but I think like a lot of stuff will be over the next couple weeks. Part of the reason I'm teaching the advanced StyleGAN class is so I kick myself in the ass and like make some of these things happen. So I would say definitely by like in a month or two, like pretty much everything we show here will be available to your models. And there's ways to sort of go backwards and fix things and that sort of thing. So if you are interested in anything you see here, we'll help you with that. So yeah, the optimistic news is that hopefully we have all of these tools available to us soon. So picking up from last class, which is where we were like generating videos, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that StyleGAN has two latent spaces, which we didn't really discuss at all until today. So I just want to quickly cover this because I think it's an interesting part of how we can talk about latent spaces, or also how we talk about things like features. So if you recall, like we had this latent space, right? We've got this three-dimensional or 512-dimensional space. And most of the time what we refer to in that space is what we call the Z space. So here people talk about, is this in the Z space or the W space? And the Z space is what we train on. It's sort of like, the concept here is that it takes all of our training data and it builds it into this space so that at every point in that space, there is at least an image. So that's sort of what we've always been talking about, right? Is that it sort of determines, okay, where does this image go, or where do these features go in this space, to create a fully, realized latent space. But there's this other thing called the W space, and we'll look at an example or two of this in just a minute. But there's this concept of entanglement, which we'll talk about a lot more today, which is like, uh, the struggle of, how do these machine learning models actually represent features in a intelligent way. And the W space is this like slightly improved space that does what we call disentanglement. So let's actually take a look at this right now and talk about it. So this is how you can sort of mathematically think about how these spaces are represented. So if you see here, let's assume this is your training set, right? So if these were people, this may be people with black hair, people with brown hair, or red hair, or people with blonde hair. And as this gets mapped into the space, the idea of the Z space is that it maps everything so that there is some locational data here, right? So there is a red-haired space, there's a brown-haired space, and there is a blonde-haired space. And what you'll sort of see here is that this is kind of warped in like this weird way. And that's because, it's just trying to fit everything into this space in a way that at every point, if you can pick any point in here, it will represent an image. But that's not actually the way that your data is represented, right? Your data is represented that like, maybe for whatever reason, your data set had less people with blonde hair or less people with red hair. Or it just sort of stretched it so that like, there's people with like brownish blonde hair and they should be close to each other. But maybe the way that the data was represented or smushed into the Z space, it like stretched it so that like brown blonde hair is here, but purely blonde hair is here, right? So like kind of stretches in a weird way. The W space is sort of the idea is that hopefully it maps it back to your data and the way that it's actually represented so that as you move between the latent space, things feel correct or like things feel like accurate, right? So you would go from, if you wanted to go from blonde hair to brown hair, you would go from blonde to brown blonde to brown. Whereas with this space, it could be a little bit wonky and weird as it moves through that space. So again, let's remember latent spaces are you move from one direction to another. So here's an example of a interpolation in Z space. Can anyone take a look at this? So imagine that we're going from this person to this person. Can anyone point out what's going on in the middle that seems inaccurate? And you can just unmute and shout it out.
Teeth.
Teeth, okay. Yeah, so you can look at this image and see that we are going from a person with a closed mouth to a person with a closed mouth, and we get teeth in the middle. Moises said glasses. Yeah, so glasses are popping in here. In these 2 points, no one has glasses, so we shouldn't really see glasses pop up. And so this is what we would call entanglement. So the idea is that like, in a like animation or like a human generated animation, when you go from this person to this person, you shouldn't really see these sort of changes. I'm trying to think if there's other things in here that we've called out before. But yeah, it's interesting, Kelly. But yeah, so this is an example of what we call entanglement. This is a thing that happens very, very commonly in the Z space. But here's the W space. So this was the exact same 2 images, and we interpolate into the W space. And you can see we get much better representation here. Like now you can almost see like where things are going wrong, right? Like this person's shirt turn like a darker color. Whereas between here, it like the shirt stays pretty representatively similar. And the animation, I guess, is a little bit more straightforward. In terms of like, what's interesting is even the way it steps between these things feels a little bit smoother, right? This person has this long hair all the way until it hits this point. Whereas here, it's actually like the middle point is like shorter hair. So it's like actually like animating in the way you might find more human representative. So this is a really important thing to think about when you're doing interpolations. Um, when we think about artistic intent, this might actually be kind of cool because you get lots of different representations of people. But this is a more quote unquote accurate representation. So as you begin to do interpolations, you can think about like, what am I trying to apply, or what do I want to do in these cases? And should I be choosing one over the other?
So I had a,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
had a
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
So in the W space, like the features are smoother as you interpolate.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate way of describing it, is that you should just see like something that feels more like if I were to hand draw this animation between these two steps, this is probably what a human would decide is like how things change step by step. One of the challenges with this particular space is you'll see here that there's a big gap here. And this is why we don't generate images directly into the W space. So usually what we do is we start in the Z space and we'll pick out 2 points, and then we translate those to the W space, and then we do the interpolation between those 2 points in the W space. Because if you choose a point here, or like say you choose a random point in the W space, it might not exist. So this is one of the challenges of how we work with these things. So you won't have to worry about that under the hood. I've sort of obfuscated away that code to make sure that you're like starting in Z and like finding your points. But this is one of the challenges of why we don't just use the W space. Okay, cool. So let me just show you a quick example of what this looks like. So in your in the PyTorch notebook, so this is probably the notebook everyone's been using. What I've done is I've just gone ahead and already turned down my my GPU. I've connected to my drive, and I've moved into my drive repo where the StyleGAN model already is. So you'll skip a bunch of this stuff, which we covered mostly over the past couple weeks, and go down to interpolations. So I think Leah showed just how to generate a video using this command. But one thing we didn't really highlight yet last week was this thing called space. And you'll see here is -- space equals Z. So this was saying like, let's generate an interpolation in the Z space using the truncation of 0.5. And we're going to use the process of interpolation. And we are going to use these seed values. So this is essentially what we did last week. But really quickly, if you want to, one thing that I recommend you do is try your truncation or try your interpolation in the Z space. And my screen is not, or my mouse is not happy with me today. You can try it in the Z space, but then I would also recommend trying the exact same interpolation in the W space. So here you'll see it is space equals W. So I really, really recommend that you just try both and see what you like. Again, for most of us, because we're dealing with like abstract data, or like, things that are less quote unquote real images, you might find you just prefer the Z space in one interpolation, and then you change out the seeds and you prefer the W in that. But it's kind of interesting just to sort of see what the differences are. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and run this. So I'm going to use, so I'm going to use our WikiArt model here. So it's kind of hard. One thing I also recommend is like, it can be hard sometimes to notice the difference between these two with your own abstract data. But with something that is a little bit more realistic, like the FHQ model or the WikiArt model, it can be a little bit clearer. So we're gonna go ahead and render this. So we'll just use these seeds that are already here. So we'll do 463 and 470. And I'm gonna make this fairly short just so we're not sitting here waiting for this thing to run. So I think Leah talked about this before, but there's a frames, and then this determines how many frames your video is. So I'm going to set this to be a little bit shorter. This will be, I don't know, less than 10 seconds, like 5 seconds, and we'll run this and we'll generate a video. So I'm going to take the exact same seed values, And I'm going to swap that out down here. No file named. Okay, so let me do this real quick. I think this is because this is a little out of date. Most of you should already have this model in here. For whatever reason, I don't, just because I've been adding random stuff to this whole project as I go. So all right, now I can use that path. So I'm going to use the exact same seeds for this animation. And just to be sure, I'm going to keep my truncation to be the same value as well, which is 0.5. So we're going to let this run for a little bit. Are there any questions about this while we let this render? No questions. Okay. So I'm going to let both these render. It shouldn't take too long. So while these render, we're not going to cover each of these other interpolations below here, but I just want to quickly talk about what each of them does, just so as you begin to play through the notebook, it's a little bit clearer what's going on. There is like cat fur all over my mouse pad, which is making this thing freak out. Okay, so this is linear interpolation. So we're just moving from point to point. So we're picking two seed values and we're moving between them. There's another couple looping functions here. There's one called noise loop. And what a noise loop does is you imagine our two-dimensional space. It kind of just bounces around in that space. And it like gets back to the place it started. So I like generating noise loops when I first finish training a model because it kind of shows me a big amount of the space and it does like just a really fun, simple animation. And there's a circular loop. So the one part about the noise loop is it's noisy, right? It like bounces around a lot, which can feel weird in space or whatever. It can have different speed effects. And then the circular loop is a little bit smoother. It should feel like almost going like a perfect loop through your Z space. One thing to note about both of these is I believe they both work in the Z space only right now. I know noise loops particularly only work in the Z space. I can't remember if circular loops are the W or Z. That's because of the way that they generate. They generate points in the Z space, and it's silly to. This gets complicated. Anyway, just think both of these are in the Z space for now. The circular one might work in the W space. I haven't looked at the code in a minute. So I tend to find interpolation with linear interpolation where you're actually assigning seeds. It's more helpful to think about the W space in those regard. Let's see if we're generating our videos here. So it looks like we're finished with this one. Let's run our second one, and we'll quickly download these as well. Oops, that's because...
Moises, do you want to unmute and ask your questions? Oh, you can't. Okay. Well, Moises asks, is there a final seed, 0 to infinity, or did you mention there are negative seeds? Are these noise and circular loops based on seeds?
That's a great question. So in terms of seeds, seeds are essentially a random value placement for a 512 dimensional vector. So seed 0 will always produce the exact same 512 dimensional vector. In terms of how many seeds there are, I don't really believe there's some mathematic value at which it stops. It's something like 14 1,000 something or something. It's like whatever like a floating point or like whatever an integer value can hold in Python, which I probably should know off the top of my head, but I don't. So there's a stopping point. Negative seeds might work. I actually have never tried that before. It Seeds don't really matter other than like what's nice about them is that when you use a seed value in these interpolations, if you reference the same seed, it will always produce the same image, which is kind of nice because if you recall, last week Leah showed us how to generate a bunch of images using those seed values like 0 through 500. So seed 1 will always be seed 1 in this particular repository. So if you like the images produced at seed 1 and you want to go interpolate between 1 and 10, no matter when you start this notebook, 1 and 10 will always be the same image. So that's what's sort of cool about using seeds. There are seed values in these loops, but they stand in place for something different. So you'll see in circular loop, there is a random seed value. That random seed value is so that you can replicate the loop. That seed does not stand in place for the other seed. It can get a little confusing because seeds are just like it's a thing within Python that allows you to generate the exact same random float values using this placeholder. So definitely for interpolations, seeds are important. For these other ones, a little less important. Did this run? Let's see. I think this ran. Okay, cool. So we should have our two examples here. Where did my Z values go? Where did those go? Content out. Oh, I replaced. Wait, no, I didn't. Oh, okay, my paths are messy here. So let me just pull out this. So this is video 1. So this is our W space. So we'll download this video. And while we're here, we will also download this one. So I have found that sometimes you want to wait for your videos to finish downloading. Chrome has an issue where if you try to download two files from this at the same time, it'll like block one of them. And it'll say, do you want to fix this? And always download as many files as you want. You'll say yes. And then you'll try to do it again. It'll just give you another error. So two Google teams need to talk to each other. So download one video at a time or one file at a time. Okay, it looks like we have both of our videos here. Meili, while I open this, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, I'm not going to type it then. I was trying to type it. So the actual source code of all of the stuff that's going on is inside the tools, right, that you're giving us? Like there's sort of two layers, I imagine. There's like the model and then there's the stuff that you wrote that you've generously had us use.
Yeah, so you can see the code for actually generating the model is very Byzantine. It bounces around a lot. It is this train.py file, and then there is a bunch of like training model libraries that are also used. It is very hard to sort of track what's going on with the training file. My hope is that the generate file, which is the one that I make a lot of edits to, is a little bit cleaner. If you go in there, you can sort of see the process of just like how you actually go about converting one of these things to an image. There is down here, there's sort of a place where you're loading in your pickle file model, and then you're generating the image seeds, and then you're passing those vector values to the model, and it generates images from it. So if you do know how to read code and you're interested in what's going on here, I'm happy to describe it a little bit more. It is definitely like reading machine learning model code for the first time is a little like a brain buzz because it's not stuff you have generally seen a lot. It uses very like heavy classes, and there's just stuff everywhere. Are you asking if this will be a part of the advanced class? I'll probably cover a little bit of it. That class still won't be a coding class, but I will cover sort of like some of the stuff that's in here if you are interested in that. Okay, so we've got our two videos. Go for it. Yep. We've got our two videos here. Let's go ahead and open them in QuickTime. And it is very hard to play videos side by side at the exact same time, but maybe we can scrub through it and just sort of look and see if we see anything different. All right. That's linear seeds. Did I name these messy? I probably did. Oh no. Okay, well let's try to guess. Let's try to guess which one of these is Z and which one of these is W. My God, come on. Go away. Go. Okay, so I'm already seeing that there's actually a little bit of a difference even in between the two images here. And this might be the W space sort of as it gets manipulated, like, right? One of these is a little bit more bluish, and the other one's a little bit more yellow. So let's start to scrub through these a little bit. Come on. The fun of trying to do live demos. Let's see if this works. Come on. Okay, you know what? Because my computer is freaking out, I am going to pass this over to Leah, who's going to start talking about projection. What I will do is I'll upload these videos to our Slack channel and we can look at them. I think my computer's just freaking out because I'm like trying to record this and trying to do a bunch of other stuff all at once. So hopefully it will chill out when I stop screen sharing, and I'll be able to post both these videos there. Leah, do you want to just take over and start talking about projection?
Yeah, that sounds
Okay,
good.
cool.
Mm.
Oh, and actually, you know what? We're already 45 minutes into class. Should we take a quick break?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's take a quick break. So why don't we do 10 minutes of a break? Maybe my computer will have chilled out by then and I can post the video. We can look at them. And then we'll come back and do projections. So we'll see everyone actually, let's do 9 minutes. So let's see everyone in 20 after.
Mhm.
Okay, bye. Okay, now go ahead.
Okay, I'm now unmuted. But yeah, right now we're going to talk about projection, which is another thing you can do with a Stallion model once you have it trained. I think it's a lot of fun to use because you can take any image you want from outside your data set, which sort of gives you more control or input into how the animation comes out. So you take any image from outside your data set, and then what happens during the process of projection is finding the closest approximation within your model, like within your trained data set. And a quick side note is if you do projection on an image and it ends up like the projected image ends up looking pretty similar, then that means that you probably had a very similar image in your training data. But often that won't be the case. Just a little bit of background on what is happening during the process of projection is here we have our latent space, the 2D space where each point corresponds to an image. And what happens during projection is um, it the network will start at a particular point within its latent space, and then it'll just take like step by step by step. I need to get closer to the image you gave me. I need to get closer. And then it just kind of like does this walk and tries to get closer and closer and closer. Um, so here's an example where like here it starts off at this, at the middle of the latent space. I'll play this on double speed. And it's trying to find Harrison Ford in the flicker faces model. And yeah, as you can see, like it will never like exactly get the same as your input image. It'll try to get as close as it can. And often it's like it's kind of fun and surprising to just try different inputs, especially inputs that don't really match your data set, and seeing what comes out. Projection is, I think it's always a lot of fun. And I'll just show one more example of projection. This is done by AK92501, and they're projecting Mario into the faces model. And, it's a little bit scary too. And if we skip ahead, like it almost gets there, but not really. And yeah, one interesting side note is, this model was never trained on anything Mario looking or anything cartoon looking. It was literally just photographs of faces. But the fact that, it gets pretty close to generating Mario means that, there's some part of the latent space that like represents things that the model didn't even see, which is, yeah, an interesting thing about these machine learning models is that they even learn stuff that we didn't show them. I'll come back to this later, or I'll leave this for you, Derek, to come back to. And yeah, going to do the demo for projection. Like I'm just back in our Stalgan 88 PyTorch notebook. Let's make sure I'm connected. Yep. And I've mounted my drive. And if you scroll down to the projection part right here, projection, there's a script called projector.py. And if you run the cell, it'll tell you what arguments you have control over. Essentially, it's overall pretty similar to what you've done before. So here's the actual line of code that'll run projection. In here, you'll put in the path to your network from, you'll go to your drive, then your PyTorch model, and then grab the path to the pickle file you want to generate from, and then just stick that right here. I've put it in a variable, but you don't need to do that. Here, your out directory where you want it to be saved to. I've chosen this folder in my drive. And then here, this part is the important part. This is where you specify which input image you want to project. So in this case, the target image was this image of Harrison Ford. In this case, the projection I'm running will be a projection of, do I have it handy? It's a projection of a photo of a lotus, which I think I can pull up right here. It's just a lotus flower. Yeah. So I've put that in, and I've told it the path to my Chinese paper cuts pickle file, and then here I've specified the number of steps. These number of steps, these will determine how long your video it is. In terms of the projection, it'll be how many of these little steps it'll take. So yeah, this number defaults to 1,000, as you can see here, but here I've just set it to 200. And then the seed, like we were talking about earlier, is just a random seed. This, I believe, does not correspond to the same seeds as your generated images. And yeah, so it's essentially just a random seed to seed this projection path. And so if I run this, it'll go ahead and start running, and then we'll see it calculating step by step. I've already run this, and we can see what it looks like right here. So It's taking the lotus on the left and trying to find a paper cut that looked like, oops, wait, it says my screen sharing paused. Hold on. Oops. Okay. So it's trying to find the closest paper cut that it can generate that looks like this lotus. And so like, yeah, it's really interesting the way the background turned blue and this purple comes through because I didn't give the model anything that looked like this. But it tries to get pretty close and ends up with this blobby looking thing. But yeah, projection I think is a fun way to get a lot of different animations out of one model that you've trained already by inputting different target images for the projection. And yeah, we can see that this one finished pretty quick. 200 steps. It'll tell you like step by step, like I'm on step 62. And this took 50 seconds. Yeah, so that is projection. In this notebook, there's also, there are two projection scripts. There's another one from this person named Peter Bailey's, who is also like a machine learning artist. And it's a slightly different projector with more options. If you type --help, it contains more options for control over your projection. Some of you may have used this model called Clip, which is, it takes text and generates an image. But yeah, I did run this with the same exact Lotus input, and then this was the result. Yeah, just a different result from, I can flip the other one. And yeah, Derek, if you have anything to say about Peter Bailey's projector, feel free to chime in.
Yeah. So I think I started to document some stuff in there. I honestly don't know a lot of details about how it works. I just know there's way more functionality. There's various different penalties that you can use. So using VGG is, I believe, what the default does, but there's also this thing of like using pixel loss, using clip. And the whole idea behind this are the different tools that hopefully get you to a better point in the space that better represents the image. But I couldn't tell you what each one does individually. I kind of sort of know. What I have done in the past is just sort of played with turning things on and off just to see what works. Also, there is a clip functionality in here. For now, I recommend not using it because you have to install a new library and it kind of like breaks some things and it can be a little weird. I need to talk to Peter about how to like clean this up a little bit more because I just quickly threw this in here as an example of another thing you could play with if you want to try a different type of projector. The whole idea behind this is like, how close can I get to an image that is outside my data set in this model? Sometimes it gets really close, sometimes it doesn't, depending on how different it is from what it's seen before. But there's all different techniques, and this is sort of like Peter has like sort of a kitchen sink script that could get you to a bunch of different options. Yeah, and clip is really interesting. Lee, if you want to go back to the slide deck, so you'll see on the right here is one of Peter's examples. And you'll actually see here, like he listed the entire script that he used. So you might want to just maybe start with some of these arguments and see if that helps. So you will see that in his script, there's a target image and there's also a target text. That's if you're using clip. Again, I would probably recommend not starting with it until I figure out how to get it to work a little bit better inside Colab. But it is an option. And this is his WikiArt model, so he's trying to find Mona Lisa inside WikiArt, and it finds like a sort of blurrier Mona Lisa version. On the left hand here is, I believe, something different. It's not a projector, but it's something kind of similar. And the idea is that there's a model of ponies or other, I don't know, other furry characters that someone made. And this person is trying to find a Elvis Presley image in there. I think this one might be purely text-based, so I don't know that there's an image you upload. I just found this on Twitter and I thought it was cool because I think it's interesting that Clip is a really powerful model, and we briefly touched on it a little bit in this class, but I feel like there's probably like a whole other class that we can maybe teach later this year about using Clip to generate images. But there's lots of cool potential for mixing and matching these tools to begin to do more with it. So I think it's pretty interesting. I would recommend just playing around with it and see what you get. There's also at the very end of that notebook, or right after the cells in the notebook, what you get when you generate a one of these projections is you get an output image, but you also get the vector at which it found that image. So in the case of like Harrison Ford, you get both the Harrison Ford image, but also what the vector is in that space. And you'll see it's projected _ W, so it's in that W space. So what you can do is later in that notebook, you can combine a bunch of those images, those W spaces together, and then you can actually do an interpolation between them. So let's say you want to go through all the Star Wars characters, you upload each image one by one, find the interpolation, and then you can interpolate between all of the various like characters using those 3 scripts here below. This is not as well documented as it should be, so if you're interested in playing with this and you get stuck, let me know, and I can walk you through how it works. But yeah, essentially, like, this is also a cool tool because now you've got those vector points in space and you can start to do stuff with them, like interpolate between things or that sort of thing. So it's like, once you begin to combine all these pieces, you've got some really, really powerful tools. And it just takes a little bit of, work to sort of like build up your sort of, I don't know, you're being comfortable with this, and then you can start to really make really interesting things. Yeah. So that is projection. It's pretty powerful and it's really cool. So I definitely recommend checking it out and playing with it more. I think I can present slides since I'm not demoing. So let me jump into the rest of the slides. So we've got about 20-30 minutes left, which I think is just about enough time. So we'll talk about some other cool features that you might be interested in. So some of these have notebooks attached to them, some of them don't. If you're interested in a topic, let Leah or I know. And if we don't have a notebook for it, we'll try to write one for you to walk through some things. So another big topic to think about with this is what we call feature extraction. So again, I keep coming back to this graphic because I think it's important to keep reinforcing this. You've got this dimensional space, right? And there's 512 vectors in here. And so the idea of a feature is, let's say we're working with a face model, and I want to be able to find a way to move the model that will take an image and open and close the face mouth, the faces, right? Or maybe I want to just change the color of the hair. So again, we're going back to entanglement, right? I want to take this image or this place in my latent space, and I just want to tweak individual components, right? I just want to tweak the hair color, or maybe the skin tone, or maybe like open and close the mouth. It would be really great if I could do that, right? Because then you could almost create like a puppetry model or other ways to manipulate your model in like a really controlled fashion. And this is sort of the future of what we want with machine learning models, right? Is like that they're almost like Photoshop tools, right? Like I can feed a model into Photoshop, and then with a bunch of sliders, I could change various parameters of this without entangling and getting a bunch of other things happening in my model. So a lot of what you'll find is like people are really, really trying to solve. This is what we're trying to solve with various pieces of, like, this is sort of the quote unquote holy grail, or like if you saw recently, I think maybe in the past 6 months, Photoshop added some features that use AI, and they change the age of a person. So you can upload an image of a person and then make them look older or younger. That is a feature vector. That's essentially what they're doing. So you might assume that like, well, there's 512 vectors in a model, so each one of those vectors is a feature, right? And from a machine learning perspective, that's how the model thinks about it. But unfortunately, what you find is this entanglement issue, where let's say vector 1, if you go between -1 and 1 on a slider, lots of stuff will change. And that's because of how the machine learning model doesn't see the way a human does, right? It sort of sees like, it just takes a bunch of pixel values or these convolutional values and sees things a certain way. But that doesn't match up with human perception. So this is the big challenge in a lot of research right now is like, how do we get to a human perception area? So again, you can sort of look at this, remember this is what entanglement is. So ideally, if we wanted to say maybe just change the hair color or make the hair shorter, what would be the feature vector that we could do to shorten hair, but not change anything else? And that is essentially what feature vectors are and what we're trying to solve for in these examples. So prior to a lot of like automated tools, what people were doing is manually creating these vectors. So what they would do is they would generate 1,000 samples of images, and they would tag each image as like, this is mouth open, this is mouth closed, this is green hair, this is blue hair, this is yellow hair, like that sort of thing. And what they would do is they would then plot those in the space, and they would essentially sort of like, almost like line of best fit would say, okay, cool, I think this is the line or this is the vector that then would open or close someone's mouth. This is, as you can imagine, a very arduous process. The idea of like tagging each image and then like doing a bunch of math to figure out like what the line of best fit is in there is not fun. People did it before because it was like maybe the easiest method or the most like understandable method. Where we are now is using various mathematic properties. There's a thing called principal component analysis, which I will definitely not get into because I only partially understand it. But the idea is you take 512 dimensions and you squish them down to like 2 or 3, and then you get that line of best fit, and you can sort of determine, this is the big feature vector. So instead of saying, this time it's what we call unsupervised. So supervised would be saying, okay, these images have mouths closed, these images have mouths open, and we want to create a line of best fit for opening and closing a mouth. That would be a supervised action. The unsupervised is like the math says, hey, there's some really important vector here because of all of this data. But I don't know what it is. You have to tell me what it is. So that's sort of what we're doing now is like, we're automating all these feature vectors, and then a human still has to go through and say, like, I think this is the mouth opening and closing vector, and label each one, but it's a little bit easier because you're not doing like hand labeling each image and then like automating it. You're sort of getting the verse, but it saves you a little bit of time. Not much, but a little bit. So the first tool that came out that was really, really cool was this thing called GANSpace. It relies on principal component analysis. What you'll see is they made a GUI tool that would allow you to do sliders. I think they faked this demo. No one has been able to get this demo to actually work and be real time like this. So I think they faked it. I could be wrong. I don't want to, speak ill of anyone, but like this would be a holy grail kind of tool, right? Like it'd be really cool if you could use this, but no one's really gotten it to work real time like this. So GANSpace uses PCA. Other people, like a bunch of other research papers came out that said, oh, I think we can do this faster using other mathematic properties or other things, like eigenvectors or other things that I can like only barely describe. But there's lots of people researching this and building different tools for this. GANSpace does this like really interesting thing where it plots a bunch of images. So along the left here are your feature vectors. So it'll give you feature vector 0, feature vector 1. So it generates a bunch of different feature vectors, and then it sort of gives you a plot of like what these images look like. So, again, applying crude human characteristics to this, we could say, a male representing image to a female representing image. That's what the first vector does. So if you take an image that is gender neutral, you can make it look more masculine by sliding it this direction and more female by sliding it this direction. Sorry, I know we shouldn't talk about gender that way, but that is kind of like some of the representations for these things. So yeah. C1 here, you can see it actually is the face direction, right? So on the one side here is faces pointing one way. Then you've got faces pointing toward the center in the middle, and on the right, you've got faces pointing the opposite direction. So, someone has to go through and hand label all these to say, what is each one of these doing, right? So we're sort of looking at these samples and being like, I think I know what's happening here, right? So this one's facing in. C2 looks like it's facing out, but in reverse direction. So C3 is like both age, but also glasses. And this is where things get really interesting, right? Because you could say, well, as people get older, they do generally wear glasses, right? Our eyes start to go. And as you get younger, like you don't need glasses because you're young and you have good eyes. Like again, these are generalizations. There's some ableism here, but based on the data set, this is what the machine sees. And then a human goes through and labels each one of these. So these are really interesting tools, and they sort of, in many ways, sort of show us the underlying data that's in these models and how to play with them. So it's a really interesting, powerful tool to use. So I ran this on a model that I had from about a year ago, using these flowers, and you get really, it's much harder. Like, again, humans are very, very finely tuned to faces, right? Like we can say like, oh, this is how someone's hair, the tips of someone's hair color changes or whatever. With more abstract images, it can be a lot harder. So this is where it becomes kind of a challenge for us to hand label our own data, but it does exist, right? So you could sort of say like, I think what this C0 does is like rotates the direction of these flowers. As you get down a little bit further here, you get some interesting things like vector 10 goes from purple to orange, or vector 11 goes from reddish to purple. So there's really interesting features in here that you could then maybe begin to do like, okay, cool, in my model, I only want to change the color, or I want to change the direction. And you could begin to use these vectors to manipulate images in a much more controlled way. So the downside is GANSpace worked with a very funky version of StyleGAN that like no one uses anymore. So it's kind of become obsolete. What we use now is actually a tool called closed form factorization. So that same notebook that we've been demoing today, at the very, very bottom of that notebook is how to do closed form factorization. It's actually a fairly quick process. What I find here is it takes 10 minutes to produce all these, and then it takes you a lifetime to go through each individual vector and label them. So there's a lot of human work involved in this. But I just want to show 3 examples of closed form factorization working, because I think it's interesting to see. So again, this is on my flower model, which I would say is like kind of hard to determine because it's very abstract. But if you look at this first vector, you'll sort of see, okay, maybe that's a size vector or something else going on. The other trick to remember here is that what you're actually looking at is you're looking at, in the center is the image you're providing it. So you provide it a seed value and it generates that image. So on the left-hand side is what we call negative vector, and on the right-hand side is a positive vector. So sometimes different things can happen in different directions. So if we start here on the right, you'll see the flowers are big and white. And then when we go back to our seed, we've got smaller and multicolored. And then on here on the right, we've got big but yellow. So the other thing you kind of have to do is you kind of have to play with a couple different seed values to see if what you think is happening happens the same across different values. So this is like, in a world where someone just generates one model and then spends a year analyzing it, this is what you do in that year of time. Many of us will just generate a bunch of models and be like, cool, we're done, we're going to play with stuff. But if you want to go deep into research, you can like pinpoint every single vector value and try to assign a style to it or like what it features. This is vector 3. And here again, I get big white flowers, smaller yellow flowers, and then maybe similar size but different white and purple values. So again, there's just like, okay, cool, like maybe I can start to play with this. It's not like the clearest, and you have to like sort of manipulate things a little bit to try to play with it. This last one is, let's see what happens here. So this one goes from purplish flowers that look like this, back to my yellow flowers, and then it seems like it stays in yellow flowers. So you will also notice that there's a little bit of entanglement, right? Like the leaves are changing a little bit as we go through these things. And that's just like kind of unavoidable. There's always going to be a little bit of entanglement in your model unless you like, some people are doing things where they like tweak the space to be not 512 dimensions, but like 10, like 1,000 dimensions or like more than that. And that's where you get like less and less entanglement, but it also like becomes a total chaos to try to use your model. But essentially, like this is one of the cool and interesting things you can begin to do with your model to explore it more and maybe produce more customizable or controllable elements. A lot of this class is just like embracing the chaos of these things. But this stuff is where we start to get to like maybe more fine-grained controls. And I would say in like 2 to 3 years, all of our models will like out of the box have these sort of fine-grained controls in them, because this is a big part of research. This is like the Photoshop tool level kind of way of manipulating these models. So there is, at the bottom of this notebook, ways to play with this. If you're interested, let Leah know and we can walk you through it. Okay, so layer manipulation. So remember how our models have different layers, right? So at the very base layer is, basic structures. At the very top layers of our model are fine-grained details. So a cool thing that people have been doing is they've been actually splitting those two models in half. So if you take a model of FFHQ and a model of Japanese art, and let's say you take the bottom half layers of your Japanese art model, which is just purely structural, right? It's like, the ukiyo-e art. You take the sort of structures on that, and then you take the top half layers of your face model, which is the like, what does skin texture look like? What does hair texture look like? And you combine these two, and you get this like creepy, uncanny valley human face. And people are doing sort of similar things where they're also then taking a Pixar model, like a Pixar animated face model, and then applying skin tone on top of it. So this is a thing that we call network blending. It basically is two trained models, and you like kind of play with at what point you switch the layers. One thing to note about this is it's pretty hard to do. If you're interested in doing this, like let me know and I can give you some tips or tricks. One thing you usually have to do is you have to transfer or like resume off of your model A to do model B. Otherwise, your weights are all messy and it turns into a mess of grossness. But it's a pretty cool thing to do. And I've seen lots of people have fun with like almost like face filter kind of things with it. There's also a thing called network bending, which is made by a different person, but a similar concept. This, instead of splitting the layers at a certain point and blending two models together, this does really weird and interesting stuff at different layers. So this is like almost like doing Photoshop filters, but applied to just individual layers. So what this is doing is it's sort of like taking all the weights at a certain layer and like making them larger or making them smaller, and it does really kind of strange things to like these images. So with this, particularly like obviously with FHQ, it's like making very weird textures, but you can also apply things like rotation or other things to your model, which can do really interesting things. So this is an example of a one of my models that does a rotation. So if you do rotations at the very base level of your model, you'll actually be rotating the structure of your model. And then the model is trying to fill in those base structures. Sorry, I wish this were looping. I should really make this a looping video. It's trying to apply detail on top of that rotation. And because most models are designed or trained at a fixed sort of like position, rotation does weird stuff because the model doesn't actually know how these structures should look rotated. So again, it's sort of like Photoshop filtery effects, but sometimes you get some really interesting things.
There are a couple questions from Moises in the chat
Okay.
about
Oh, cool.
PCA. Is PCA part of unsupervised learning, mapping features and labels, etc.?
Not really. PCA is just a mathematic function that can be applied to high dimensional spaces. There's lots of ways to use PCA to do other things. It's used a lot in text embedding. So for text models, it's a way to just take high dimensional spaces and make them smaller, lower dimensional spaces. So you can take 512 dimensions and squish them down to 3. And the idea is that you just keep the most valuable data when you squish down those layers. Yeah.
And then one more question about network blending. This is blending pickle files. Question mark.
So blending is taking two pickle files and essentially merging them. And you decide at what point you merge them, right? So is it layer 5 or is it layer 14? And the layer at which point you blend them, or which is the lower layers and which is the higher layers, produces different results. So you're taking two models. What it does produce is it does produce one pickle file. So you'll merge two pickle files, you'll get a third pickle file, and then you'll use that to do interpolation or projection or other things. Okay, so whoops, I'm gonna need to stop sharing here and reshare real quick here. I'm gonna turn on my audio for this one, so it might get a little loud.
And question from Kelly, is there a GUI where I can scrub around a three-dimensional latent space box? Or is there a manual way to explore these spaces?
So the manual way is um, sort of the feature vector tool, which produces a ton of videos, and you go through each video one by one. There are not good GUIs for these at the moment, which is unfortunate because part of it is just like the way that these models generate images takes a little bit of time. So there's no like real time effect for these things, or that not yet. People have been trying to do real time, and it's a little bit of a trick. So yeah, there's no good GUIs for these yet. I would love if GANSpace actually worked as a GUI, but it doesn't today. And Runway, unfortunately, Runway is not set up to really do this. I wish Runway were, but it's not really in their current product spec. Um, I've seen some tools that get better at this, and I don't know. Maybe someday I'll be inspired to build my own. But it's a bit of a struggle to make. I think anytime there's like real time, like machine learning is just not set up well for like instant feedback. So unfortunately, there just aren't a lot of tools for that just yet. But again, these are things where I would hope in like the next year or two, you'll probably see more like that. Okay, so last topic I want to cover is audio reactive. So this is again, you've got your dimensional space, right? And each dimension is a mathematic value between -1 and 1. So because these are mathematic values, you can attach any other data to move those numbers up and down. So you could, I think the Anna Riddler project, which I think we've shown before, took the price of Bitcoin, and the price of Bitcoin rising or falling would move the vector in a certain direction. So you can do that with any data. So audio reactive is essentially taking audio data, parsing it, and then mapping whatever audio data you're applying to a vector or to like anything in your model. So I built a really basic audio reactive notebook. It's not finished. I'm like converting it from an old notebook. But if you're interested in playing, this is probably the one I would start with because it's really straightforward. So what you do is you assign your pickle file and then you upload an audio file. And what it can do is it can match volume to interpolation. So you'll pick two seed values, and when the volume is 0, it's at one seed value, and when the volume is at 1, or the max value, you're at the other seed value, and in between there you get different results. So I'll play this video real quick. It might be loud, so you might want to turn down your audio if it is loud. As one example. Down and down. Down and down. Down and down. Down and down. Okay, so that essentially just took the volume of this song, which has like, lots of low parts and lots of high parts. You can sort of see it like react to the audio. I don't know how well it plays over Zoom, but you can check out the video in the slide deck later. So that is, I just literally used this notebook to do that. So if you want to check that out, it should be fairly well documented, but this is a great thing to ask later about if you get stuck anywhere. There's also in this notebook a way to detect pitch. So there's a pitch detection machine learning model that can also do interpolation. So instead of just volume, it could say, if you've got a bassy tone moving to a high tone, that would also do the interpolation. One thing I'll note about this one is if you're going to use this, make sure that you only use like a single sound frequency. So like songs with both like drums and other things gets pretty crazy. So just do like someone singing or like a piano or like an individual instrument because the pitch detector is not the best. Hopefully by this week, by the end of this weekend or whatever, I'll have volume for truncation. So volume can control that truncation value, and also how to apply your feature vectors to this. So you could apply volume and just have it go from like big flowers to little flowers, or any other feature vector. So I should have that in a little bit if anyone's interested in playing with that more. But this is a fun little notebook, and it's also just like a nice demo. Like people are always like, "Oh my God, you attached that to audio? That must be so hard," and it's like kind of not. So play with it and have fun. There's lots more we could do with this, and I think in the advanced StyleGAN class, it will cover way more of how to do audio reactive stuff. Um, one notebook that we might look at in that advanced class is a notebook by Hans Brewer, who is a machine learning artist, and he's also a musician. So he has like a far more complicated way of like taking all of these various components in a sound file and mapping them to different pieces. So mapping one part of the sound file to interpolation, mapping another to truncation, mapping another to like rotating the image, and mapping another one to like what's called noise, which is like little detail things. So there's an article linked to here if you're really interested in digging in that explains all the various components of this. It's really cool. We will definitely cover it in that advanced StyleGAN class. So even if you're not in that class, when the recording is finished, I'll let folks know and you can check that out because there's a lot to do here. The default is fun, but he'll also say that like if you go beyond the default, it's like pretty much like a ton of different features and different things you can control and manipulate with this. I won't play this video, but if you're interested, you can check it out because it's pretty cool. Let's see. Oops. Wasn't going to do that. I'm also not going to play this video because it's also kind of creepy and loud. But there's Robert Luxemburg, who I think was sort of one of the early pioneers of this technique. What he did is he found a song that has like a vocal track that was split out and the band itself. And what he was able to do is he took the vocal track and the feature vector for someone opening their mouth and combine them. So that literally looks like someone is talking or like mouthing. It's like mouthing the lyrics to the song. And then the drum track and other like accompanying track can actually manipulate other parts of the model. I think this might, no, this is not a link. I have his notebook. It's probably a little out of date today. We might have to update it, but if you want to get into really complicated ways to split out various trackings, we can look at how to do that as well. Leah, do you really want to quickly cover Touch Designer?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this past Sunday I taught a workshop on doing like offline, like if you have your latent walk videos, how to make them audio reactive. The complete like recording is linked here, and also the complete Touch Designer project files. Um, and then I've also heard that I've linked to online inference. Like this would be not using an offline pre-rendered video file, but actually hooking up your pickle file to Touch Designer with something called Spout. I haven't gone through it yet, but there are tutorial videos linked right there. And they're by Vasily Betin.
Yeah, so I think everyone's first question when they look at StyleGAN is like, can I do that real time? Can I like VJ this? And that would be a lovely thing to do. Unfortunately, because these models require these really high-powered GPUs and most people don't have them, it can be a big challenge. And also, just the pipeline, it takes a little bit of time to render each one of these images into image files. The pipeline to actually like render those directly to like a screen interface is I've seen a couple people be able to do it with real-time stuff, but it's really challenging. So I would say again, in the next year or two, we'll get to real-time. But today it's pretty hacky and kind of annoying. So I think the offline stuff that I've seen Leah and other folks do, I think is really cool. And you may want to play with doing something like that, where it uses the video file, and I think it like it sort of scrubs between the video files. Is that what it does? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are interested in Touch Designer, I am not a Touch Designer person, but Leah is your contact for that if you want to talk to her more about that. So, okay, so that wraps up sort of like everything that you can play with StyleGAN. I think there's lots of links in here, so if people want to dig in and ask questions, we're around to do that. Usually I end these classes with like a bunch of links to like other courses I or Leah have taught, other courses other people have taught, cool resources, but I also knew we just weren't going to have time to cover all that. So I recorded this video, actually it's just a clip from a previous class. So if you are interested in what other classes are on my YouTube page, Leah, we should probably add some links to your YouTube pages as you're beginning to teach more classes. Other courses by other either artists or just machine learning people, as well as links to other cool artists to check out. So this is like a 20-ish minute video that also includes a shout out for my Patreon account at the end. We should probably re-record it because Leah also has a Patreon account. But this is just a bunch of other resources. So if you're like, if this is the last class you're taking with us, hopefully there's way more stuff in here that you can check out. So hopefully you watch those. I will say if you can't make it into either of my next classes, for $1 a month, my Patreon account, you get links to basically all the recordings as they happen. So like there are Patreon folks who have been basically taking this class with us without being here because they get all of the recordings. So if you are interested in that, I try to make the value very, very high for those. And I know Leah has her own Patreon account as well where she's giving away stuff too. So again, you don't owe us any more money, but if you are interested and want to continue learning, those are pretty good resources. And there's a bunch of links in here. I think this will also link out to the slide deck where it also links to artists and other people's Twitter profiles and other things. So Maylee also had a question about like, what about the rest of the Slack channel? That's a great question. So in general, it's a little I should probably do a little bit of cleanup here. But there are other channels. Other channels are more or less linked to by sort of topic. So there's a datasets channel, there's an ethics channel. There is a channel that I definitely recommend you all like share work in out of this class is the share projects channel. So other people will post things that they've been working on. I feel like sometimes there's flurries of activity in channels and then no one posts for a month. So don't worry about posting. Sometimes that like just gives people a little bit of a kick in the butt to like also post in there. There's a StyleGAN channel, which is mostly people asking why their model isn't working or like asking me for technical support. You are always welcome to respond to people. I really appreciate it, but you don't owe anyone a response. I also don't owe anyone a response, but I try where I can. So hopefully like you're welcome to use this channel like continuously past class. You're welcome to use our channel, which will probably go quiet after like the next couple weeks, but you should also do that. But you're also welcome to drop questions in any of those channels. If you don't get a response, it's not because I don't like you. It might mean I'm busy that day, or someone else might be able to answer it. So if you don't get an answer, you can always DM me or Leah. Like I'm pretty happy to like talk to people who have taken my classes before as much as possible. But yeah, after the next couple weeks, like I will be slower to respond just because I'm going to be teaching other classes. But I'm always going to try to respond. So if you don't get a response from me, like just wait a day or two and then be like follow up and be like, hey, do you have an answer to this? And I will eventually respond. I promise. So Leah's newsletter is also great. I definitely recommend checking that out. She sent out a note last week. Was it the week before?
Yeah, it was last week.
Yeah, but it also highlights other artists. Her last newsletter was an artist who took a bunch of classes with us, and he is still doing lots of cool stuff. So maybe one day you'll be in the newsletter. So yeah, there's lots of. I feel like every day there's more and more content around machine learning art, and it can honestly be overwhelming for me. So I think Leah and I are trying to like synthesize it down to like what's the cool stuff to check out, but it can be pretty hard to sort through all of it. But Leah's doing a really cool job of that with her newsletter and other things. So we're a little over time. So if you do have additional questions, like please let us know in the channel. Please fill out the poll if you're interested in doing a show and tell with us. I hope you are.
And we have a survey.
And we have a survey. Oh shoot, yes. At the very end, we'll send out links to this, but at the very end, there's also a survey. So give us feedback on this class. We are constantly optimizing these classes based on length, material we cover, material we don't cover. We pretty much every class, like after this class is over, like we will review all the material and make changes to future classes. So we're also always experimenting. This is the longest class we've ever taught. We've taught very short classes, which worked okay, but also felt kind of weird. We've taught longer classes. I feel like maybe this class is too long. I feel like I've seen a lot of people sort of drop off in the last couple weeks, which I totally understand. But yeah, give us feedback if there's something you really didn't like, or like thought was a hard way to learn something. Like we're always trying to optimize these things. So we really appreciate feedback on that. So hopefully you'll all show up for the show and tell. If you don't want to present but you just want to hang out, like we'll let people know when that happens, and we'll send out the link to it so people can come and check out work. But I hope you'll show up, and even if you just want to present or like record something for like a minute or two, like that's totally fine. This is very, very much optional and very much like should not feel like a stressful thing. But it's a fun time to sort of see everyone's work because, you know, the first couple weeks, like everyone's sort of like quickly using Runway and making cool things. And as we get further and further along, it becomes a little bit harder to like sort of keep the momentum up. So I find the show and tell is a nice way to just sort of like get that last burst of momentum to finish out some work. So unless there are any last questions, I think we'll call it a day, and hopefully we'll see each other over Slack, if not at the show and tell.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.